Hey everybody, welcome to Average Guy Opinions. I'm your average guy, John Corelli. We are on to part 3 of who knows how many when it comes to modern day goings on in the Middle East and maybe how we got there. I've discussed the military industrial complex from World War II up until about, we'll say, the 60s and 70s, and also, within that, the wars, the social upheavals that were going on, and even the comfort zones that the United States especially experienced during the 1950s. But here's where we get into some of the regimes that were taking place or had been put in place, especially right during and after World War II. We've probably all heard the statement, the phrase, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And that happened hundreds of years in advance, but it also was continuing during the 1960s and 70s, while the Russians and the Americans were building up their nuclear armaments and preparing for World War III. Countries like Britain, France had colonized huge parts of this planet, especially in Asia and Africa, were still doing really well. Former superpowers that were now only powers, like I said, France and Britain, had put puppet regimes in place all over the planet, especially the Brits and especially in the Middle East. So this is leading up to some conflicts that happen, and a transfer of power from we've heard of British Petroleum, one of the most powerful entities on the planet. The British petroleum industry in general is a very powerful entity still to this day, because of what they did in World War II when they were in North Africa and had to fight for oil for their war machine and to try to repel the Nazis and win World War II, which of course eventually happened. But those powers stayed in place afterwards during the Cold War, and as we're starting to get into the real heart of the Cold War in the 1970s, here's a huge conflict that happened in my lifetime that I witnessed on the news was the Iranian hostage crisis. Now, this obviously happens in Iran, and this is where we get into understanding what was going on in the Middle East that people like me and a lot of people older than me had no idea about. So one of the puppet regimes that the British had put in power was the Shah of Iran. And the Shah was, a pro British, pro exporter our oil, but not necessarily let our people get a lot of that slice of the pie, and a very secular, and that's key to this, a very secular leader. The Brits didn't want to get too much into Islam in a very, very Islamic country, and there were a lot of people that were okay with this, honestly. There are a lot of people, here's where it gets complex, because people in these countries a lot of those people were fine with the Shah. And especially if maybe they did have a low paying but a family supporting job with a company like British Petroleum, and maybe we're okay with a secular government. Like maybe the Ayatollah shouldn't be our leader because he's kind of a nut, and he's, I can't think of the word right now, but a religious led government can be a very scary thing. But so that's how that happened. And we were in there supporting. We were also, the United States, was in there supporting the Shah, militarily, governmentally. And this was 1979. This happened in 78, 79, 79. I believe in November. We'll call them Islamic radicals, which isn't really fair because radicalism is a sliding scale, is it not? Like a Muslim that's really wants Sharia law here, radical. Wants it in Iran or Iraq, maybe not so much, right? And there are a lot of people that support that type of stuff, especially in Saudi Arabia, where there's a ton of oil. And notice that we've never gone there. No matter what human rights crimes are being committed, we have, and we know this from what happened on 9/11, we have some really tight ties with the Saudis, and we've let them get away with a lot of shit. Other smaller countries where the Saudis aren't really going to say anything, not so much. So the Iran hostage crisis happened in November of 79, lasted all the way until Reagan's inauguration day in 1980, January 20th of 1981, 444 days, I believe. It was a big deal when I was a kid. I was like 12 and trying to understand the world, and I found it kind of fascinating, even at 12, that, hey, how did this happen? And it happened because people were sick of our shit. They're sick of a puppet regime put in by a foreign power and supported by another foreign power. And so they overran the not the UN, the U.S. Embassy, and they took, I think, 70 some hostages. And Carter was president at the time. Carter tried to a rescue mission that failed and ended in the death of, I believe, 8 servicemen. It was an ugly time, but this also shows how we are starting to get into we're not just putting puppet regimes there. We're not just putting our companies there. We're starting to affect politics, not just by putting a puppet person in regime. And so I'll get to that right now. This is what happened in response to the Iran hostage crisis. The Ayatollah Khomeini came into power, popular power, not by a lot, but like I said, there were a lot of secular people that were fine with the Shah, but there were a lot of people that also wanted, Islamic law, Islamic government, and an Islamic state, right? And so Khomeini takes power during the crisis. Reagan comes into office. What do? We put our own puppet on the other side of the border, Mr. Saddam Hussein, right? This is fucking poetic. It's insane. And we are putting puppet regimes all over the world, whether it was Pinochet in Chile, Lumumba, I believe, in the Congo. It was happening all over the world, rationalized by the fact that, well, if we don't, the Russians will. That's what Vietnam was all about. That's what Korea was all about, right? Other little skirmishes were all about us heading off the big bad communist red bear wherever we could. And to be frank, the Russians, the Soviets were doing it as well, putting puppet regimes to basically create a wall against us. And so, but this is crazy, and I'm going to finish up on this. This takes a few minutes to describe it. Also, it's starting. Now we're in the Middle East. Now we're headed towards Israel, right? And so, this is one of my favorite little factoids about American history and how we affect policy, and we do some just slimy shit that we've done. So we put Saddam Hussein in power, a horrible dictator who wanted power, and he's the leader of Iraq now, right? We'll see, like 10 years later, that we have to deal with his ass. Also reminds me of a great quote by Harry Truman. We also supported a dictator named Tito back when all the countries that created Yugoslavia were just called Yugoslavia. What do we got? We got the Serbs and the Montenegrins, and I can't. Several countries made up Yugoslavia. Tito was our post World War II dictator there, and one of my favorite political quotes ever is Truman saying, "Yeah," because he was doing horrible things to his people, and Truman said, "Yeah, he's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch." Really, pretty much the attitude that prevailed and still does to this day, often in world politics. So anyway, we put Saddam Hussein in power, which is a threat to Khomeini. The Iraqis and the Iranians go on an 8-9-year war from 1980 to 88. Million people killed, a million. A horrific war, a ground war, a nasty ground missile war. And here's one of my favorite things about Saddam Hussein is his personal envoy in 1986 under President Ronald Reagan. Saddam Hussein's personal envoy was Donald Rumsfeld. Donald Rumsfeld, does that name ring a bell to you? He was the Secretary of Defense under Bush Jr. Yeah. And he was like one of the main proponents of, we got to get this guy out of there. You were his personal envoy back when he was on our side because we were pissed off at the Iranians. Now that he's going into Kuwait, he's a menace, right? It's insane. It's literally insane who we side with and how we did. We set up that war. We funded that war on both sides. If you know anything about Iran-Contra crisis, look into it. We sold armaments to Iraq and Iran at the same fucking time. We were fine just kicking back going, yeah, go ahead, destroy each other, you bunch of Muslim freaks, you camel jockeys. That was the United States policy. As long as we got the oil out of there, we don't give a fuck. And so that leads to these policies being bandied about, or not bandied about, these policies being a huge, how do I want to put it? A huge keystone, or a lock. Yeah, no, keystone's a good word for it, as to how we approach countries in that part of the world. We don't give a shit about human rights. We didn't care about the Kuwaitis. We just didn't want Saddam going down getting more oil for his war machine. That's why we went there in 91 and pretty much took him out. Well, we didn't take him out, but we took the Iranian or Iraqi war machine out and had that country down on lockdown for 12 years until Bush reopened it because he was pissed because Daddy lost the election, partially because of his mishandling of that skirmish war, whatever you want to call it. So there's just another key in this piece of how we build up to how we support certain countries like Israel, right? So we take sides, we literally pit governments against each other, and then we have the audacity to say, to talk to the rest of the world like we're the authorities on righteousness and freedom and justice. We're not. We're so not. So there's part 3. I'm going to try to get more into the Middle East. There's so many other things affecting this, like the Cold War, but I'm going to try to stay on point. But there's a big thing. Yeah. So remember that. If anyone calls you out on not wanting to support the troops, and because you're essentially just supporting the military-industrial complex. No offense to the military, but they're not all heroes. They're guys just like I am. There are good teachers, there are bad teachers. There are good football players, there are bad football players. There are good military guys, there are piece of shit military guys. I've met them, and I've met the good ones. Just because you put on a uniform doesn't make you superior to anyone else, okay? So there you go. Military-industrial complex headed towards Israel, and the conflict that still flourishes to this day. Anyway, went a little long. I'll see you in part 4. Thanks.